This particular car, it says use Dexron 3 only. Do not overfill. Well, Dexron 6 is backward compatible. You can put Dexron 6 in Dexron 3 transmission, but you can't do vice versa. So I'm good that way. And if I flip it over, you can see the different, if I can get this thing to stay, different marks for full. There's a cold range down here and a hot range up here. But I can't check that until I've started the car's warmed up, and I've shifted through all of the gears. So I want to make sure that the transmission is properly lubricated, so I have enough fluid in there for that to be true. And the last quart and a half, whatever it happens to be, that I'll have to kind of add as I go. So let's get into the vehicle, put this dipstick back in, and get in the vehicle and start it up. One little trick on these vehicles, this intake sits right on top of what you need to work on and you can't get to anything. You can kind of twist it out of the way, but it'll probably pop off of here. And one thing you can do to make the car run, because this is the math, and it's this big hole that won't operate properly, so one thing you can do is just rubber band a plastic bag over it. Then you can run without the resonator and still check your transmission fluid easily. Alright, I'm inside the vehicle. I have it running. And got the shifter in park right now. What I need to do to get the transmission fluid to circulate through the entire transmission and get rid of the air bubbles is to shift through all of the gears. And I'll just wait a little while in each range. In this particular vehicle, shifting from drive to third, even though you're always in first gear, stopped like this, does actually change a few things in the transmission. Going from drive to third disengages a sprag clutch, which lets you do engine braking, and then 2 and 1 don't actually change anything in the transmission in this particular vehicle, but just as a matter of habit, in your particular car, whatever it might be, you might as well go through all the ranges since all transmissions are a little bit different. And at this point, I'll check the fluid again and see what the level is, make sure that it's not grossly overfilled or something. But otherwise, I'm going to let the car warm up a little bit and add some more fluid, 1/2 quart at a time, until it's full. Then I'll take it for a drive and check it again. Alright, I'm taking the car for a drive to see how it shifts through all the gears, get the transmission fluid circulated, the transmission warmed up, because you really have to drive it to get the transmission warmed up. Just because the engine is hot doesn't mean the transmission is. You have to work the torque converter to get that to go. And this particular car, if you can see it in the dash, has a service engine soon light. That is the transmission problem that I was mentioning earlier. The torque converter clutch does not engage. So if I'm really lucky, changing the transmission fluid will help that, but I'm not going to hold my breath for that. Basically, I'm just trying to make sure that it has good fluid in it. But I'm just going to drive the car around for a while, make sure I go forward and reverse through all the gears, and then come back to my garage and top the fluid off. When I left, the fluid was at the full cold mark, which is about where it should have been, so I put in 6 quarts, and that may be almost exactly correct. It's a good thing I didn't overfill it. But we'll see what happens here. Gonna step on it here, see what happens. It seemed to go pretty smoothly. It's a lot louder without that resonator on it, that's for sure. But I'll put that thing back on when I get back to the garage. Well, I got the fluid topped off. It did take about 7 quarts in all to fill it to the full mark when hot. Took it for a drive. It seemed to shift through all the gears just fine. It always did, but no damage done apparently. So that was me changing the transmission fluid in my vehicle. The main purpose of doing that was not really to change the fluid, but to inspect the pan to see what the condition of the transmission was, if it had any obvious major problems aside from that torque converter clutch. And it seems like it was okay, so I'm just going to keep driving it, monitor the transmission temperature and such, and hopefully it stays cool enough and will last me a while. I do have this thing, scan gauge. It's an older scan gauge that I programmed a command into memory, and it doesn't come up now because the car's not on, but that tells me the transmission temperature. So next time I take it on a longer trip, I'm going to monitor that and make sure that it doesn't overheat. But otherwise, I'm definitely not a mechanic, so if I had any gross errors in what I did, feel free to point them out, but just a guy making a video, so thanks for watching. I'm back. I decided to make this little addendum to the video because it may be useful information to some people, and people might ask anyway. So I was worried about the transmission temperature in this vehicle because the torque converter clutch is not engaging on this car. The torque converter clutch basically bypasses the torque converter, which reduces those inefficiencies, those losses in the torque converter. In a typical automobile, the torque converter loses, during cruising speeds, 10 to 15% of the power output of the engine, and that goes directly into heat into your transmission, which then has to be removed typically through the radiator. There's a liquid-to-liquid exchanger inside the radiator, which acts as both a cooler and a heater. Transmissions can be too cold, so instead of running it to an air cooler where the air temperature might be minus 20 Fahrenheit during the winter in some climates, they run it through the radiator core, where the temperature is much more stable, even when it's cold, since there's engine heat available there. But anyway, that additional power that gets lost in the torque converter normally gets bypassed and recovered because of the torque converter clutch, but in this car I don't have that luxury because the torque converter clutch is out. So what I did is I took the vehicle on a drive, took it on the highway first I drove it around town for half an hour or so to get everything up to temperature, and then I took it on the highway at about 70 miles an hour. That's the stretch of road that I have around here. It was a windy day though, so the transmission got a good workout, and monitored the transmission temperature. I had mentioned that I have a tool here. Happens to be a Generation 1 scan gauge. It's kind of ugly, but it works just fine. And it has a whole bunch of different gauges that you can put on here. Right now it's showing the water temperature, coolant temperature, the manifold absolute pressure, instantaneous miles per gallon, and ignition advance. Car's not running right now, so some of those are zero. But what I'm using to monitor the temperature is a function on here that allows me to send commands to the PCM, powertrain control module. And this particular car uses VPW. It's one of the 3 standards used to communicate to automobiles through OBD2, Onboard Diagnostics 2, which started in 1996. And GM vehicles, for the most part, use VPW, variable pulse width, up until 2004, 2006, something like that. This happens to be a 2003 vehicle, so it's VPW. And the command that those particular vehicles use are right here. This will read the transmission temperature if you send it this command. And you can pause the video and write that particular number down. It's in hexadecimal, which is base 16 versus the base 10 that we're used to. That's why there's letters and numbers in there. You can do conversions through lots of utilities, Windows Calculator, Google will tell you the conversions, but I found this on ScanGauge's site, but there were no explanations on how to interpret the command or the response, so I had to kind of figure that out myself. Let me just send the command here a minute. more commands, and send. And that is the response from the computer. And you know, what the heck is that, right? Well, inside that contains the transmission temperature, which is, in this vehicle, the transmission pan temperature. And there is some information on the internet that is incorrect, so I'm going to show this here, which is just something I wrote in the back of an envelope, trying to figure out how to decode this thing. The command is up on top, and probably doesn't matter a whole lot for most people, but the left two characters are the header. The next two is the ID of the scan tool. In this case, it's my scan gauge. F1 is the standard for that. 10, hex 10 is the ID of the PCM. And this 621940 is the response. The respond command, so that the scanner knows which command is being responded to, since it could have had multiple commands sent out and being queued up by the PCM. And 3D in this case is the transmission temperature, and 27 is the CRC, cyclic redundancy check, which we don't care about. So basically, you send the command through whatever tool you happen to have. Lots of scan tools can do this. And you get this back. In this case, 53 is the only number that we care about. And 53 is the temperature in hexadecimal, but it's encoded a bit. I looked on the internet to figure out how to interpret 53 in this case, and the information I found was wrong, so I had to figure it out myself. And I made this little table, which is out of focus, so let me focus in on that. So here's my little table. The hexadecimal is on the left, the degrees Celsius is in the middle, and the degrees Fahrenheit is on the right. So in this case it's 53, which is somewhere in between 50 and 58. And that corresponds to 110 degrees Fahrenheit approximately. And this car's been sitting in the garage for half an hour or so, so it's cooling off. But basically, if you want to know how to interpret that without this table, take the number that you get in hexadecimal, convert that into decimal, base 10, what we're all used to if you're not a bithead like me, and that number has a 40 degrees Celsius offset. So if the number that you get, in this case, if you read hex 50, that would equal 80 in decimal. You take 80, subtract 40 degrees from it, because minus 40 Celsius is the coldest that it can read, and you end up with 40. So that ends up being 40 Celsius, which converts to 104 Fahrenheit. And that's how you read transmission temperatures from VPW vehicles, which is most GMs. In terms of the transmission temperatures, kind of depends what transmission fluid you have. I have Dexron 6 in here now, as I mentioned, which can withstand a little bit higher temperatures. It's a synthetic blend, but in any case, typically any transmission temperature below 200 Fahrenheit is considered normal. 175 to 200 is a pretty typical transmission pan temperature for transmission fluid, and 300 degrees Fahrenheit is immediate failure. So if you ever see 300, there's a good chance your transmission is now ruined. And actually, this vehicle, if the temperature gets up to 295, the engine computer, actually does certain actions to prevent the temperature from rising any further. Not all vehicles have that, and you don't want to get it that hot anyway. Basically, if you routinely run above 220, expect a very short transmission life. So anyway, I should continue before this gets exceedingly boring. But so I took my scan gauge here and sent this command. Took it on the highway, ran it at 70 miles an hour against the wind, and let it warm up. And basically, it was about 55 degrees Fahrenheit out that day, so it wasn't very warm. But basically, the transmission temperature when I was running around town was about 140 degrees Fahrenheit, just butzing around town. It's pretty well where it's stabilized. And when I took it out on the highway, it stabilized at about 175 degrees Fahrenheit. So I no longer have any concerns about this particular vehicle with transmission temperatures. I'm sure if I would go through mountain driving, towing a trailer, it would overheat without that torque converter clutch, but I just won't do that, and I won't have a problem. I may still want to change the transmission fluid every 50,000 miles instead of 100,000 miles, but that's a long time in the future and I'm not going to worry about that right now. So I just wanted to mention what I did to check the transmission temperature of my vehicle, and maybe that information is useful to somebody else out there. So maybe this time it's actually the end. Thanks for watching.